When I married Jill, or Jillian as she liked to be called, I had no idea what would happen next. My name is Tony Rowan, and I believed we would grow old together and enjoy our grandchildren. 2 years after we wed, I started my own consulting engineering business, while Jill worked for a small medical supplies company. We decided to wait a bit to settle down and save money before having kids. For 8 years, we were happy and had a great sex life. I really thought I had married the perfect woman. I bought a small cottage in a quiet alley. It needed a lot of work, but it was structurally solid. Our nearest neighbor was 200 yards away, and there were only 6 other houses on the street. It took almost a year, but we finished the house together, with some help from hired workers for plumbing and electrical jobs. I was relieved when it was finally done. Jill and I often talked about how wonderful it would be to have children, but everything changed just before our 9th anniversary. Jill started to be harsh with me, and our bedroom life was nearly non-existent, which made me frustrated. She began dating women from her work, going out a few nights a week, and she never came home before midnight. I started to worry the worst might be true, but I convinced myself that Jill would never cheat on me, even though I didn't realize how mistaken I was. I reached out to my childhood friend Barry Patton for advice. We've been friends since our freshman year of high school, and when my company grew and I needed an executive director, I turned to him because I trusted him. Barry knew Jill and was shocked by what I told him at first, but after hearing more, he changed his mind. He said, "All the signs point to it, Tony. Honestly, I think Jill is cheating on you." I'm really sorry to say that, but I bet my career on it. When he said that, I knew he was serious. I thanked him and headed back to my office, where I sat at my desk trying to figure out what to do. If Jill was cheating, our marriage would be over, but the downside was she would take half of everything I owned. I began searching for a private investigator and found someone who could meet me later that day. When I explained my worries to Joe Amos, the investigator, he promised he would find the proof I needed if Jill was unfaithful. I left feeling a bit better, hoping I was wasting my money on his services. The next day, a technician came to my cottage to set up hidden cameras and connect a voice recorder to the phone line. I didn't think it would show anything since Jill would be smart enough not to use our home phone if she was cheating. A week later, I reached out to Joe, and the news he had was hard to hear. He told me all the details were in the report, and the DVD was graphic. He advised me against watching it, saying that knowing was one thing, but seeing it was completely different. I thanked Joe for his help. I paid the final fee and took the report and DVD back to my office. Ignoring Joe's advice, I decided to watch the DVD. The report revealed that Jill's outings with her friends were actually cover-ups for her hooking up with a coworker. They spent long lunches and afternoons at a motel nearby. The report also mentioned they visited his house multiple times. The DVD, recorded on a Thursday, showed Jill coming home with a man. They quickly went to the bedroom and slept together for hours. Jill seemed to do everything for him. What shocked me most was her comment to him, saying she wanted to meet again because what they had felt amazing. I had never seen any guy she was with other than this one. While I was decent in size, he had at least 5 cm on me. We were similar in age and build. I planned to catch them at the cottage, confront them, and throw Jill out. The following Thursday, I left work and drove by our house. Sure enough, Jill's car and another unfamiliar one were in the driveway. I parked on the street and went inside, hearing them having a wild time upstairs. I barged into the bedroom and shouted for the guy to leave. That was a mistake, because he was a lot bigger than me, over 6 feet tall and much heavier. The next thing I knew, everything went black. When I came to, I was tied to a chair with a gag in my mouth. Jill was on the bed with 3 guys, telling them to go harder. Eventually, one of them saw that I was awake and laughed, calling me a weakling. Jill got up, walked over to me, and smiled while her face was covered in something. She pulled the gag out of my mouth and I asked her why she did this to us. She said being married to me was boring, and she wanted to have fun, while I just wanted kids and a wife at home. She told me that I barged in to ruin her fun. With that sickly smile, she said she no longer needed me since she had 3 real men satisfying her. Then she said her friends were going to take me somewhere and hoped I would like it. I didn't recognize the woman in front of me. It definitely wasn't my wife. Jill, she wouldn't do that to me, would she? Suddenly, one of the guys hit me hard in the face, and everything went dark. When I came to, I was lying on my side, my wrists and ankles tied, with a hood over my head. I could feel I was inside a vehicle, probably a van because of the cold metal floor. Then I heard someone say I was waking up again, and they didn't want to carry me anymore since we were almost at our destination. The ride got bumpy, and my head throbbed from the hit. When the car finally stopped, I realized it might have been better to keep driving. I was told to untie my legs so I could walk my last steps. That's when I suddenly understood I might be about to be killed. I stumbled over uneven ground and almost fell several times. "Get up, you bastard. I'm not carrying you," a voice shouted as a hand slapped the back of my head. I silently wished for whatever was coming to happen quickly. I stood still, waiting for the sound of a gun. The hood blocked my view, and out of nowhere, they started kicking and punching me. I fell to the ground, feeling the blows until I lay still and knew I was barely alive. A hand touched my neck, fingers moving around. I overheard someone say I was dead, and they debated whether to bury me or leave me there. They decided to leave me since no one was around for miles. I lay there as I heard them laugh and leave. Time felt like it stretched on for hours, but it was probably just about 10 minutes until I heard a car drive away. While lying on the ground, I wondered what made Jill hate me so much. I remembered her teasing me about my size. Pain shot through me as I tried to get up. It took several tries because I was tied up, but I finally stood. My body ached like I'd been hit by a truck. The first thing I needed to do was remove the hood, which was torn and dirty. I didn't want to wander around in the dark, so I slowly made my way to a bush and pressed my head against it to pull off the hood. Eventually I got it off, and my eyes adjusted to the darkness, but my left eye was swollen shut and didn't help much. I just hoped what happened wasn't permanent. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I realized I was in a forest or thicket, but I had no idea where. I started walking along the easiest path I could find. I wasn't in any shape to climb after falling. I'm just an average guy trying not to die. It took everything in me to keep moving forward. After a while, despite the pain, I spotted a light in the distance. As I got closer, I saw it was a cottage or farmhouse. I gathered all the energy I had to reach the gate, but when I tried to open it, I couldn't. I screamed, and then everything went dark again. When I managed to open my eyes, my left eye was still shut. I found myself in a room and attempted to sit up, but the pain hit me hard, so I laid back down. A woman stood over me and told me not to move, saying I must have had an accident. I asked her who she was and how I got there. She said she found me outside her house the night before, heard my scream, and saw me lying unconscious on the ground. I remembered trying to open the gate and told her my name was Tony. She introduced herself as Rosemary, but preferred to be called Rosie. She asked what happened, and I told her it was a long story and that I wasn't sure I should share it. My ribs ached whenever I tried to talk. Rosie offered to call the police, but I begged her not to. I promised I wouldn't hurt her and that I would explain later. I must have blacked out because I didn't remember anything after that. The next time I woke up, Rosie was in the room again, and I managed to sit up. She propped me up with pillows and I saw my torso was wrapped in bandages. I had cuts all over my arms and legs. I asked for a mirror, and Rosie handed me a small one. Almost dropping it, I saw my reflection. My lips were cut and swollen, my left eye was blackened, and my right eye was bruised along with more cuts on my face. Rosie asked if I was ready to tell her what happened. I nodded and explained everything I could remember, from finding Jill with 3 men to trying to open her gate. Rosie insisted I should call the police, but I refused, saying I needed to handle it my own way. She said I should stay with her until I was well enough to leave since she didn't know where I lived. I thanked her for her help, still unsure who this woman was. She looked about 45, which was 10 years older than me. Rosie let me use her phone to call Barry and let him know I was okay. When he answered, he sounded worried, asking where I had been because everyone was frantic looking for me. I asked Barry to do me a favor and not tell Jill that he had heard from me. I promised to explain everything at the next meeting. If something comes up at work, I trust you to handle it. I ended the chat, and Barry looked happy. Then Rosie asked about my plans. I told her I'd rest until I could move better and head home. After that, I planned to make some people pay for what they did to me. I wasn't sure how, but they would pay. Rosie just nodded and smiled, saying I should do what I needed to, but to be careful. It hit me then that aside from knowing her name, I didn't really know anything about Rosie, and I had no idea where I was. When Rosie mentioned the nearest village, I realized I was probably at least 3 hours from home. She took care of me, and it wasn't until weeks later that I felt well enough to leave. I told Rosie I would call someone for a ride. She said she'd take me to the train station in the village, warning that whoever I called wouldn't find this place since it was so remote. I barely managed to fit into her small car, proof that I still wasn't fully healed. I thanked Rosie, and her reply was the same, to be careful. I waited for Barry to pick me up. When he arrived, he was shocked at my condition. I filled him in on everything, and he shook his head in disbelief. I suspected Jill was motivated by greed. If we divorced, she could take half of everything. I figured she promised her new partners some cash to get rid of me because she knew the company was worth millions. I offered to stay at Barry's place, and he agreed to cover for me if anyone asked. I then requested he grab my laptop and some clothes from the office. Barry chuckled, saying it felt like he was hiding a fugitive. I joked that I might be, depending on how my revenge played out. On the way, we stopped at a mall where I got jeans, t-shirts, socks, underwear, and sneakers, enough for now, since I hoped my wardrobe at home was still intact. It was dark when we reached Barry's house, and I could only imagine what the neighbors might say. Barry shared that Jill was still pretending to be the caring wife, calling everyone except the police and checking in with him daily about me. As I healed and could walk without pain, Barry noted Jill had cut back to 1 call a week, suggesting she was too busy enjoying herself to truly care. With time to think, I considered how intense my revenge should be. I focused on various ideas to deal with Jill and her partners, but many of them involved getting someone else involved, which I wasn't ready for. I ended up on the dark web, where I learned I could hire a hitman if I wanted to. There were mentions of mechanics, what they called assassins. I eventually came up with a plan, but turning it into reality was a whole other issue. Out of desperation and anger, I sent a message for help with a chemical problem. I got some replies from strange people, but one seemed to really understand. After exchanging a few messages, I felt he was genuine and seemed relieved I wasn't with the police. He sent a program that would encrypt our messages, so I logged out and closed the software. I looked online for the things I needed to buy, which took longer than I thought, because I was looking for certain brand names. Once I had everything, I realized I needed to know when Jill and her company would be at home. I went back online and bought some listening devices. Barry and I spent time talking in the evenings, and he never asked about my plans, so I kept quiet. Things were going well at work, and I told Barry I'd probably be back in a week or 2. When the devices arrived, I went back to the house. Jill's car was in the driveway, but I didn't care why she was home. I saw her leave, and after a few minutes I went inside. Luckily, she hadn't changed the locks, thinking I was dead. I put a bug in the living room and one in the bedroom. Despite having men around, the place was clean and tidy, with fresh sheets on the bed and no signs of anyone else being there. That evening, I heard Jill talking to a man whose voice I recognized from before. He mentioned he had set up a meeting with some guys for Friday. Jill asked how many would be there, and he replied that there would be 9, but one wouldn't make it. She seemed excited, saying that the conversations turned her on. I turned off my laptop, not wanting to hear what came next. I hoped the guy would enjoy it because if my plan worked, no one would be with Jill after Friday. On Friday night, I waited in the bushes in front of the house as Jill came home with a few cars behind her. After half an hour, I crept to the back door. I heard Jill screaming for them to hurry up, and I quietly went upstairs. I made sure everyone was in the bedroom before pouring a liquid on the carpet, leaving a line back to the kitchen. Then I did the same with a second liquid. The person who told me about this was right. When mixed, there was hardly any smell. But he warned me that the more I used, the stronger it would get. The third liquid acted as a trigger. Once it mixed, there'd be chaos. I poured it into a puddle alongside the first two, thinking it would take a moment for them to react. I slipped out the door and ran to the rented car. As I drove away, I saw a flash in the rearview mirror but didn't stop. I drove straight to Barry's house. Luckily, he was out on a date. I took a shower and went to bed. The next morning, I drove back to Jill's house to act like I was letting her know I was alive, while also planning to collect some clothes and personal items, even though I knew they were likely burnt. When I turned into an alley, a policeman stopped me. He told me I couldn't go further and asked me to park and wait. He went to the cottage and soon returned with a man in a suit. Detective Inspector Hobson approached Mr. Rowan and asked where he was last night. Mr. Rowan explained he was at a friend's place because he and his wife were living separately. When asked how long he had been staying there, he replied it had been a couple of months. He had gone back to pick up his clothes and personal items, but there had been a fire in his cottage that night. Curious, he asked to see it since it was his home. As they walked, the detective continued asking questions. Mr. Rowan denied having any flammable materials at home but mentioned a small gasoline canister in the barn he used for his lawn mower. When they arrived, the cottage was in ruins with a collapsed wall and a sagging roof. The detective said only firefighters were allowed inside since they were removing bodies. Mr. Rowan didn't know if his wife had friends over that night, explaining they had broken up and he didn't know what she did. He learned there were 10 bodies, and they were checking for more. Shocked, he thanked the detective and headed back to his car. A few miles away, he called Barry, who confirmed they had been home all night. Mr. Rowan informed the police about his separation from Jill and said he'd be staying with Barry while figuring things out. 2 months later, the investigation concluded the fire was an accident, likely due to a gas appliance malfunction. The coroner ruled the deaths accidental, counting 1 woman and 9 men. Mr. Rowan speculated Jill might have been having a party with colleagues since they were apart. He attended Jill's funeral mostly out of decency. When the coffin was lowered, he tossed in some dirt and a rose with a postcard attached that read a harsh message. People likely misinterpreted it as a sign of love. Jill's mother asked why he wasn't home that night and questioned the 9 men. Mr. Rowan replied they were separated and suggested she connect the dots herself. Afterward, he moved from Barry's place to a small apartment. The biggest loss was replacing his wardrobe. The insurance covered the house, which he sold to a developer, not wanting to rebuild. The media speculated about the night and why 9 men and 1 woman were there, but he chose not to respond, letting people think what they wanted. He didn't know the men or follow the news about their funerals. He tried to find Rosie, who saved him from the fire, but couldn't locate the cottage despite asking locals. Barry didn't bring up the fire. Instead, he suggested setting up a date. Mr. Rowan was focused on moving forward with his life. There was a woman in his apartment building he had only exchanged hellos with, and if they began dating seriously, he planned to have a prenup before marrying again.